The attic smelled like dust and memory. Jake Crawford had been putting this off for 24 years, ever since the funeral, ever since they buried Grandpa Jim in the family plot outside Lubbock next to Grandma Mary and the generations of Crawfords who had worked this Texas land since 1887. The ranch house stood empty now. Nobody wanted to live out here anymore. Too far from town, too much work, too many ghosts. Jake was 52 years old and worked in Austin doing something with computers that his grandfather never fully understood. He came back twice a year when Grandpa Jim was alive, Christmas and the 4th of July. Grandpa Jim never complained about the sparse visits, never guilt-tripped him, just said the same thing every time Jake pulled up in whatever car he was driving that year. "Welcome home, son. Ranch is always here when you need it." Now the ranch was Jake's. All 800 acres of scrub grass and cattle fencing and memories he never knew existed. The lawyer had handed him the deed and the keys back in 2000. 24 years ago, Jake had locked the door and left. Told himself he would deal with it later. Later became years. Years became decades. And now, in the spring of 2024, he finally forced himself to climb those attic stairs. His knees protested. 52 felt older than it should. He wore his grandfather's old work boots, resoled 3 times, worn smooth in places. They fit perfectly. Same size feet, same long Crawford build, same stubborn streak about putting things off, his ex-wife always said. Sunlight cut through the attic window in thick golden bars. Dust motes swirled like snow. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, some labeled in his grandmother's neat cursive. Christmas decorations. Tax records 1960 to 1985. Family photos. Others had no labels at all. Those were the ones Jake came for. The mysteries. The things Grandpa Jim never talked about. And Grandpa Jim never talked about the war. Not once, not ever. Jake had tried asking when he was 12. Wrote a school paper on World War II. Needed a primary source interview. Figured his grandfather was perfect. Decorated veteran. Military police. Served from 1942 to 1946. The basics were in the family Bible. But when Jake brought his tape recorder to Sunday dinner and asked Grandpa Jim about his war experience, the old man had gone very quiet, set down his fork, looked at Jake with those pale blue eyes that had seen too much. "Some things don't need telling, son. Some things you just carry." That was the end of it. Jake got a B on the paper using library books instead. Now Jake opened beasts in the silent attic. Found his grandmother's wedding dress. Found report cards from the 1950s when his mom was in elementary school. Found a purple heart in a small felt box. He stared at that for a long time. Had never seen it before. Never knew Grandpa Jim was wounded. The metal felt heavy in his hand, heavier than metal should feel. He set it aside carefully and reached for another box. This one was different. Older, made of dark wood instead of cardboard. The kind of box you built to last. Brass hinges green with age. No lock, just a simple latch. Someone had burned words into the lid with a woodworking tool. The letters were rough but clear. Camp Clarkson, Personal Effects, 1944. Jake's heart kicked faster. He knew that name. Camp Clarkson, one of the POW camps in Texas during the war. He had read about them in college. Hundreds of thousands of German and Italian prisoners shipped to America, held in camps across the country. Texas had dozens, put the prisoners to work on farms and ranches, helped with the labor shortage while American men fought overseas. But Grandpa Jim never mentioned serving at a POW camp, never mentioned Camp Clarkson, never mentioned any of this. Jake opened the latch. The hinges protested. Inside the box was a layer of tissue paper yellow with age. He lifted it carefully. Beneath the paper lay a pair of military boots. Men's size 9, U.S. Army issue, brown leather worn smooth. The soles were old but intact. Someone had polished these boots regularly for decades. The leather gleamed even in the dusty attic light. Jake lifted one boot out. It was heavier than he expected. Solid, well-made. The kind of thing they built to last through a war. He turned it over in his hands. Inside the tongue, he found a stamp. Black ink faded but still readable. Private J. Crawford, Lubbock, Texas, 1942. His grandfather's boots. From before Grandpa Jim made sergeant. From the beginning of the war. But why were they here in this box? Why preserved like this? Why polished it so carefully after all these years? Jake reached into the left boot. His fingers touched paper. He pulled out a small photograph, black and white, creased with age but protected by the boot's interior. The photo showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, serious expression, dark hair pulled back severe. She wore what looked like a military uniform. German. Jake recognized the style from documentaries. Wehrmacht auxiliary, the women who served in support roles. Nurses, radio operators, clerks. Someone had written on the back of the photo in pencil. The handwriting was not his grandfather's. More careful, more European. Elsa Bergman, Fort Clark, New Mexico, February 1945. Jake stared at the name. Elsa Bergman, a German woman. Why did his grandfather have her photo hidden in his boot? He reached into the right boot, found another piece of paper. This one folded very small, very carefully. He unfolded it with gentle fingers. The paper was thin, the kind you used when paper was rationed, the kind you saved and reused. Written on it in fading ink were words in German. He could not read German, but he recognized the shape of the letters, the careful formation. Someone had written this with great care, great intention. Below the German words was a second note, different handwriting. This one in English, typed on an old typewriter, the kind with keys that struck hard and left impressions. Miss Bergman, Sergeant Crawford asked me to have this translated before he shipped out. Thought you would want it back. He carried it with him. He did not make it home. Battle of the Bulge, January 22nd, 1945. He wanted you to know your words mattered. Captain Rodriguez, Jake read it 3 times. His grandfather died in the Battle of the Bulge. But Grandpa Jim lived to 92, died in 2000 of old age in a hospital bed surrounded by family. This did not make sense, unless there were 2 Crawfords, unless this box belonged to someone else. But the boots were stamped with his grandfather's name, his grandfather's unit, his grandfather's hometown. Jake's hands shook as he unfolded the paper further. At the bottom below Captain Rodriguez's typed note was a 3rd edition, handwritten, rough pencil, the writing he recognized. His grandfather's hand from decades ago when it was still steady. Ma'am, rules matter because people matter. Don't forget that. JC. And finally at the very bottom, the translation of the German words typed in brackets. Thank you. I was wrong about enemies. Jake sat back hard on an old trunk. The attic spun slightly. His grandfather had known this German woman. This Elsa Bergman. Had given her these boots somehow. She had written him a note. He had carried it into battle. Had written her back before deploying. Had wanted her to know something important enough to write down before possibly dying. But Grandpa Jim had not died in the Battle of the Bulge. Had come home. Had married Grandma Mary. Had raised kids and cattle. Had lived a long, quiet life until 2000 and never once mentioned any of this. Why Jake pulled out his phone, searched for Camp Clarkson, found a historical society website. The camp had existed from November 1944 to June 1945. Temporary facility. Held mostly female prisoners from the North Africa and Italy campaigns. German auxiliaries. Closed when the war ended. All prisoners repatriated. Location now just empty scrubland 15 miles outside Amarillo. He searched for Elsa Bergman. Found nothing at first. Then refined the search. Added nursing. Added Germany. Added post-war. One result appeared. A scanned interview from 1973. Part of a historical archive project. German medical workers remembering World War II. The interviewer had talked to nurses and doctors about rebuilding Germany's medical system after the Nazi regime collapsed. Jake clicked the link. His internet was slow out here. The ranch still used the same phone lines from 1960. The page loaded in pieces. First the text, then a photograph. The photograph showed an older woman, maybe 50, seated in an office. Behind her were bookshelves filled with medical texts. She wore a white coat, a stethoscope around her neck. Professional, serious, kind eyes. The caption read, Dr. Elsa Bergman, Dean of Nursing, Hamburg Medical College. Interview conducted March 1973. Jake scrolled through the interview transcript. Most of it was in German with English translations below. Elsa Bergman talked about studying nursing in the 1930s, about being drafted into the Wehrmacht Medical Corps in 1941, about working in North Africa until capture in 1943, about spending 2 years as a prisoner of war in American camps. And then near the end of the interview, the interviewer asked about her teaching philosophy. What shaped your approach to medical ethics education? Elsa Bergman's answer filled 2 paragraphs. Jake read them twice, then a third time. I learned medical ethics from an American sergeant in Texas. He never spoke to me directly, never gave lectures. He simply followed the rules. Geneva Convention, military regulations. He treated us not as enemies, but as human beings requiring care. When we were freezing, he brought blankets. When we were sick, he ensured medical treatment. When I needed boots, he gave me his own. He did not do this out of kindness. He did it out of duty, out of belief that rules exist to protect human dignity even in war, especially in war. He died before I could thank him properly. I have spent 30 years teaching his lesson to my students. Rules are not weakness. Rules are civilization. The interviewer asked a follow-up question. Do you still have the boots he gave you? Elsa Bergman smiled in the photograph that accompanied this section. It was a sad smile, a smile of old grief mixed with old gratitude. Yes, I keep them in my office. I show them to every new class of nursing students. I tell them these boots saved my life twice. Once from freezing in a Texas winter. Once from hatred that would have destroyed my soul. The sergeant's name was James Crawford. He was 36 years old. He was from a ranch in Lubbock. He had lost a sister to cold when he was a boy. He understood suffering. He chose to prevent it even when the suffering belonged to enemies. That choice changed my life. I hope to honor his memory by teaching 10,000 nurses what one Texas cowboy taught me. People matter, even when rules say they are your enemy, especially then. Jake's vision blurred. He wiped his eyes roughly. His grandfather, Grandpa Jim, the quiet man who never talked about the war, who worked cattle and fixed fences and said grace before dinner, who taught Jake to ride a horse and rope a calf and keep your word no matter what. That man had changed a German prisoner's entire life, had given her boots, had taught her something so profound she built a career on it, had impacted 10,000 nurses through one act of basic human decency, and he never said a word. Not in the 55 years he lived after the war ended. Not once. Jake looked at the photograph of young Elsa Bergman again, looked at the boots still gleaming with polish, looked at the note his grandfather had written before deploying. Rules matter because people matter. He had to know more, had to understand what happened in that camp, had to find out why his grandfather kept this secret for 55 years until his death, had to discover what these boots really meant. He pulled out his phone and called the National World War II Museum in Texas. A woman answered on the third ring. Professional voice, helpful. My name is Jake Crawford. My grandfather served at Camp Clarkson in 1944. He passed away in 2000. I just found some items in his effects. Boots, a letter from a German prisoner. I think there might be a story here. Do you have any records from that camp? The woman's voice changed, became interested, excited even. Camp Clarkson. We have limited records. Most were destroyed when the camp closed. But we have been collecting oral histories, trying to preserve these stories before the generation is completely gone. What did you say your grandfather's name was? James Crawford. Sergeant. Military police. Silence on the line. Then typing. Computer keys clicking rapidly. Mr. Crawford, I think you should come see us. We have something you need to see. Can you come to Amarillo this week? Jake looked around the attic, looked at the boxes of family history he had been avoiding for 24 years, looked at the boots that held 80 years of secrets. I can be there tomorrow. The museum director's name was Patricia. She was 65, former Army nurse herself. She met Jake in the lobby with a warm handshake and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the wooden box he carried like it was the Ark of the Covenant. You brought them. Jake nodded, set the box on her desk in a small office crammed with filing cabinets and framed photographs of old soldiers. Patricia opened the box carefully, lifted out the boots with reverence, turned them over, examined the stamps, read the notes. We have been waiting for these, she said quietly. What do you mean? Patricia walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder thick with papers. set it on the desk between them. 24 years ago, we received a donation from Germany. The family of Dr. Elsa Bergman. She died in 1998. Her granddaughter was cleaning out the estate and found boxes of letters, correspondence with American soldiers, with the Crawford family, with Camp Clarkson administrators, with historians. Dr. Bergman spent 50 years trying to find your grandfather, trying to thank him properly. But she only knew his name and his unit. Your grandfather never responded to her letters. We assumed he did not want contact. Many veterans did not want to revisit the war. Jake felt something cold in his chest. My grandfather never got those letters. He would have responded. I know he would have. Patricia nodded slowly. That makes more sense. We wondered. Because Dr. Bergman's letters were so heartfelt, so persistent. She wanted to return something to your family, something she said your grandfather gave her in January 1945. The boots, Patricia smiled. The boots, she kept them for 53 years, polished them weekly, used them in her teaching. They became famous in German medical education circles. The boots that taught empathy, the boots that proved enemies could become teachers. When she died, her will specified they should be returned to the Crawford family in Texas. But we could not locate you. Your grandfather was listed as killed in action. Battle of the Bulge. We had the wrong information. Jake's head spun. Wait, Grandpa Jim was listed as killed. Patricia pulled out another document, a military record. Jake saw his grandfather's name at the top. James Michael Crawford, Sergeant, Military Police. And below that, stamped in red ink, killed in action, January 22nd, 1945, Belgium. But he lived, Jake said. He came home. He died in 2000 at 92. Patricia stared at the document, then at Jake, then back at the document. There must have been a clerical error. It happened sometimes in the chaos of the bulge. So many casualties, so much confusion. If your grandfather was wounded and evacuated, the paperwork could have gotten mixed up. He could have been listed as killed when he was actually recovering in a field hospital. By the time the error was discovered, the initial reports had already gone out. Jake thought about the Purple Heart in the attic, the wound his grandfather never mentioned. He was injured, Jake said. I found his Purple Heart. He never told us about it. Patricia nodded. That would explain the confusion. And if he came home and never corrected the record, never contacted Dr. Bergman, never spoke about any of this, then everyone assumed he died. Dr. Bergman spent 50 years mourning a man who lived, and your grandfather spent 55 years carrying boots and letters and memories he never shared. Why, Jake asked. Why would he keep all this secret? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the boots, at the letters, at the photograph of young Elsa Bergman in her German uniform. Survivor's guilt, maybe. If he was listed as killed, if Dr. Bergman thought he died, if she built her whole career on honoring his memory, then maybe he felt he could not intrude on that, could not show up years later and say, surprise, I am alive. It would complicate her narrative, her teaching, her life's work. So he stayed silent. Let her believe the story she needed to believe. The story of the American sergeant who died after teaching her that rules matter, that people matter, even enemies. Jake looked at his grandfather's handwriting on that old note. Rules matter because people matter. He stayed dead so she could keep teaching, Jake said slowly. He sacrificed his own recognition so her students would have a more powerful story, a martyr instead of just a man. Patricia's eyes were wet. That is the most James Crawford thing I have ever heard. We have testimonies from other guards at Camp Clarkson. They all said the same thing about your grandfather. He never wanted credit, never wanted attention, just wanted to do the job right. Follow the rules, keep people safe. When other guards asked why he went above and beyond for prisoners, he always said the same thing. It is not about being nice. It is about being right. Jake felt the weight of 80 years pressing down. His grandfather could have been famous, could have been honored, could have had documentaries made about him, but he chose silence, chose to let a German woman he knew for 6 weeks become a teaching legend while he went back to ranching cattle and raising a family and never saying a word. What do we do now? Jake asked. Patricia smiled. We tell the truth. Your grandfather is gone. Dr. Bergman is gone, but their story is not. We have an exhibit planned, opening in 3 months. June 6th, D-Day anniversary. We are calling it The Boots That Taught an Enemy to Pray. We have Dr. Bergman's letters, her testimonies, her teaching materials, interviews with her students, photographs from Camp Clarkson, records from the Battle of the Bulge. We were missing only one thing, the boots themselves, and the American side of the story, your grandfather's voice. Jake looked at the wooden box, at the boots that started all of this, at the letters that connected two people across an ocean in a war and 80 years of silence. I want to help, he said. I want people to know what Grandpa Jim did, what he taught, why it mattered. Patricia reached across the desk and squeezed his hand. Then let me tell you a story, she said. Let me tell you what really happened in Camp Clarkson in the winter of 1944. Let me tell you about the night your grandfather chose rules over revenge, and how that choice saved more than one life. It saved a soul, and that soul saved 10,000 more. Jake settled back in his chair. Outside the museum window, Texas stretched forever under a blue sky. Somewhere out there was the empty land where Camp Clarkson once stood, where German women froze in canvas tents, where an American sergeant from a cattle ranch decided that even enemies deserve dignity. Patricia opened her folder and began to read. It was December 1944, the coldest winter Texas had seen in 20 years. And in a temporary prisoner of war camp 15 miles from Amarillo, 87 German women were about to learn something that would shatter everything they believed about America, about enemies, and about what it means to be human in the middle of a war. Patricia's voice filled the small museum office. Outside, afternoon sun painted the Texas panhandle gold. Inside, Jake Crawford leaned forward as the story of his grandfather unfolded like a map he never knew existed. Camp Clarkson was never meant to be permanent, Patricia began. Built in 3 weeks during November 1944, canvas tents and wooden frames and barbed wire strung fast because the war was producing more prisoners than anyone expected. The main POW camp in Amarillo was full. Overflow went to Clarkson, temporary holding until transport could be arranged to permanent facilities in New Mexico and California. Most camps held men, German soldiers, Italian conscripts. Camp Clarkson got something different. 87 women, medical assistants and radio operators and clerks captured in North Africa and Italy, the kind of prisoners nobody knew quite what to do with, too valuable to ignore, too unusual to process quickly. So they sat in a hastily built camp on empty Texas scrubland while the Army figured out paperwork. Your grandfather arrived November 18th. He was 36 years old, senior MP, responsible for security and welfare. The women arrived November 23rd, 5 days before the temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight. Jake watched Patricia pull out a folder of photographs, black and white images of canvas tents in empty fields, guard towers made of green lumber, women in German uniforms standing in formation, looking cold and scared and defiant all at once. The first week was routine, Patricia continued. Process the prisoners, assign tent spaces, establish work details. Your grandfather ran everything by the book, Geneva Convention article by article. The other guards thought he was excessive. Why treat enemy prisoners better than regulations required? But your grandfather had a saying. The men who served with him all remembered it. What was it, Jake asked? Patricia smiled. Rules are not suggestions. Rules are what separate men from animals. Follow them when it is easy and you are decent. Follow them when it is hard and you are civilized. That sounds like Grandpa Jim, Jake said quietly. He used to say something similar about ranching. You take care of the land even when it costs you. You take care of the animals even when they are going to slaughter. Because how you treat things in your care says who you are. Patricia nodded. Cowboy code. Your grandfather grew up on that ranch learning his father's rules. When he joined the Army, he just applied the same principles. A cow in your care deserves food and water and shelter. A prisoner in your care deserves the same. Basic human dignity, not because they earned it, because you are responsible for them. She pulled out another photograph. This one showed a man in MP uniform. Tall, lean, hard-faced but kind eyes. Jake's breath caught. His grandfather at 36, decades before Jake was born, but recognizable. The same long Crawford build. The same way of standing like he was rooted to the earth. "That is him," Jake said. "That is Sergeant James Crawford." December 1944. 1 week before everything changed. Patricia set the photograph aside and continued reading from her notes. The cold came fast. December 1st, the temperature was 40 degrees. Unpleasant but manageable. December 2nd, it dropped to 20. December 3rd, it hit 15. By December 5th, it was below freezing at night. The tents had no heat, no insulation, just canvas and wind and 87 women with one blanket each. Your grandfather noticed immediately. He always noticed. The other guards said he had eyes like a hawk, missed nothing. During morning formation, he watched how the women moved, stiff, careful, like every motion hurt. He watched their hands, red, swollen. He watched their feet, some limped, others shuffled to avoid putting weight on frozen toes. He filed a report. Conditions not adequate per Geneva Convention Article 25. Requested additional blankets. Requested stoves. Requested construction completion on the permanent barracks. The camp commander, Major Henderson, read the report and sighed. Everything your grandfather requested was already requested. Supplies were back-ordered. Construction crews were busy on priority projects. The women would have to make do. Your grandfather made do. Patricia pulled out a handwritten document, faded ink on military stationery. A supply requisition form filled out in careful block letters. He went to local ranchers, called in favors. Your family ranch donated straw bales. The Morrison Ranch donated wooden pallets. The supply depot in Amarillo donated surplus blankets that were technically assigned to a different camp, but somehow got rerouted. Your grandfather never explained how. He just showed up at the women's compound on the night of December 5th with 2 junior MPs and enough materials to keep 87 people from freezing to death. Jake stared at the requisition form, saw his grandfather's signature at the bottom. Approved without authorization. That must have been risky. Patricia nodded. He could have been reprimanded, using military resources without direct approval, accepting civilian donations without proper clearance, redistributing supplies meant for other facilities. But he did it anyway, because the alternative was watching people freeze, and that was not acceptable. Not to James Crawford. "What happened that night?" Jake asked. Patricia's voice softened. She was reading now from a testimony. One of the German women interviewed decades later. The woman's name was Inga Müller, radio operator, 34 years old in 1944. She spoke English well enough to serve as unofficial translator. She remembered everything. "We thought we were going to die," Inga Müller had told the interviewer in 1989. "Not from bullets, from cold. You cannot imagine cold like that if you have not felt it. Texas cold is different from European cold. Drier, sharper, it cuts through everything. We tried to sleep that first week. Impossible. Lying on frozen ground pulls heat from your body faster than blankets can replace it. Within minutes, you are shaking so hard your teeth crack together. Your muscles cramp, your fingers go numb. We learned quickly, sleep meant freezing. So we stood, all night, 87 women standing in circles inside canvas tents, swaying slightly to keep blood moving, taking turns in the center where it was warmest. Nobody spoke. Too much energy. We just stood and waited for dawn. The 5th night was worst. Temperature dropped to 10 degrees. Wind tore through the canvas like it was paper. One of the young girls collapsed. Anna Schmidt, 19 years old. True believer. Nazi youth movement. She thought suffering proved loyalty, thought complaining was weakness. She stood rigid all night, refusing to sway or move to the center. Around midnight, she fainted, just dropped. We caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was gray, lips blue. We thought she was dead. Then the American sergeant appeared. Patricia paused, looked at Jake. Your grandfather was making rounds. Midnight check. Routine. But when he saw Anna unconscious, something changed. The guard said his face went still, like he was seeing something from a long time ago. Something that hurt. The sister Jake said, "Margaret, she died when Grandpa Jim was 10. Pneumonia and cold. He found her body." Patricia nodded. That trauma shaped everything he did. He carried Anna to the medical tent himself, against protocol. Guards were not supposed to have physical contact with prisoners, but he did not wait for a stretcher. Just picked her up and ran. Got her to the medic. Stayed while they worked on her. She survived. Hypothermia, but treatable. And that same night while Anna was recovering, your grandfather returned to the compound with supplies. Straw to insulate the tent floors. Pallets to raise sleeping areas off the ground. Extra blankets still warm from the guard barracks. He and two MPSS worked for 3 hours in 10-degree cold. Spreading straw, arranging pallets, distributing blankets. The women watched in silence, too shocked to react, too cold to question. When it was done, your grandfather spoke through Inga the translator. One sentence, lie down, try to sleep. Regulations. Then he left. No explanation, no speech about kindness or mercy, just a statement of fact. Regulations required adequate shelter. He provided adequate shelter. Simple as that. But it was not simple, Patricia said quietly. It was revolutionary. Because those women had been taught that Americans were monsters. Propaganda said American soldiers raped and tortured prisoners, especially women prisoners. Instead, they got a Texas rancher who followed rules so strictly that even enemies received dignity. That cognitive dissonance broke something in them, or fixed something, depending on how you look at it. Jake thought about the note. Thank you. I was wrong about enemies. One of those women was Elsa Bergman, he said. Patricia pulled out another photograph. Young woman, serious face, dark hair. The same image Jake had found in the boot. But this photo was larger, clearer. He could see details, the tension in her jaw, the fear in her eyes trying to hide behind defiance, the exhaustion that came from standing all night every night. Elsa Bergman, 22 years old, medical assistant, Luftwaffe, captured in Tunisia, May 1943. She was a true believer. Nazi ideology ran deep. She had joined the youth movement at 14, believed every word of the propaganda. Americans were subhuman, defeat was temporary. Suffering proved loyalty to the Fuhrer. When your grandfather brought those supplies, Elsa refused to use them. Stood all night again, alone in the corner while the other women slept on pallets and straw. Inga the translator begged her, "Please, Elsa, you will die. Your loyalty does not matter if you are dead." Elsa said no. Accepting enemy help was betrayal. Your grandfather noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. The next morning during formation, he walked past her, stopped, looked at her hands, purple with cold, looked at her feet. She was shaking despite her rigid stance. He said nothing, just made a note on his clipboard, walked away. That afternoon, the medic Lieutenant Chen examined all the women. Mandatory frostbite check. Elsa tried to refuse. Chen insisted. Regulations. When she finally removed her boots, her feet were a disaster. Early-stage frostbite, skin cracked, toes swollen. Chen treated her immediately, ordered her boots dried by a heater, issued temporary replacements. Elsa expected punishment for refusing help, expected mockery, expected cruelty. Instead, she got professional medical care and a quiet comment from your grandfather delivered through Ing. "Ma'am Cole does not care about your pride. Neither do I. But regulations say you need to survive. Your choice." Then he left her alone. No forcing, no arguing. Just a statement of fact and a choice. Patricia looked up from her notes. That was your grandfather's genius. He never tried to change minds, never preached, never explained. He just followed rules consistently and let people draw their own conclusions. Elsa could choose to freeze. That was her right. But the option to survive was available. Rules guaranteed it. Her ideology said accepting help was weakness. The rules said accepting help was sensible. Eventually, reality wins over ideology, especially when reality is 10 degrees and falling. Did she accept? Jake asked. Eventually. Took 3 more days, 3 more nights standing alone while everyone else slept warm. By the 4th night, her body overruled her mind. She sat down on a pallet, just for a minute, just to rest. Woke up 6 hours later. First real sleep in 2 weeks. She cried when she realized she had broken her own rule. Cried harder when she realized nobody punished her for it. Inga said Elsa was never the same after that night. The certainty cracked. The ideology started leaking. If Americans were monsters, why did they provide heat? If defeat meant death, why were they still alive? If the Führer's teachings were absolute truth, why did reality keep contradicting them? Your grandfather planted those questions without saying a word, just by following Geneva Convention regulations, just by treating enemies like human beings who deserve basic care. That was the first crack in Elsa Bergman's Nazi worldview, the crack that would eventually shatter everything she believed. Patricia closed that folder and opened another. This one had work detail rosters, assignment sheets, medical reports. After that first crisis passed, Camp Clarkson settled into routine. Temperatures stayed brutal, but the women adapted. Pallets and straw helped. Extra blankets helped. Work details helped most of all. Your grandfather organized them carefully. Geneva Convention allowed non-military labor for prisoners. He assigned tasks based on capability. Medical assistants worked in the camp infirmary. Radio operators helped with communications. Clerks handled paperwork. Elsa was assigned to the medical tent. Lieutenant Chen requested her specifically. She was competent, efficient, professional despite her ideology. Chen was Chinese-American, West Coast family, highly educated. He treated Elsa with the same professional courtesy your grandfather modeled. No hostility, no lectures, just clear expectations and fair treatment. Elsa worked there every day, organizing supplies, assisting with examinations, learning American medical protocols. And every day your grandfather checked the medical tent, routine inspections, clipboard and notes. He rarely spoke to her directly. Everything went through Ingham. But he watched, always watched. The other guards asked him why he paid such close attention to one prisoner, why he checked on Elsa Bergman specifically during every shift. Your grandfather's answer was typical. She is high risk for frostbite recurrence. Medical monitoring is protocol. But the men who knew him said it was more than that, said he recognized something in her stubbornness. Same quality he saw in young horses that needed breaking. Not cruelty to break them. Patience. Consistency. Firm but fair handling until they learned to trust. One of the junior MPS, a kid from Houston named Bailey, remembered your grandfather talking about it once. They were doing fence repair. Hard work in cold weather. Bailey complained about wasting effort on enemy prisoners. Why not just keep them locked up and fed and forget the rest? Your grandfather stopped working. Looked at Bailey with those pale eyes. Said something Bailey never forgot. Son, back on my ranch, my daddy taught me to break horses. You can break a horse with a whip. Beat it until it stops fighting. You will get a broken horse. Useless for anything but pulling a plow, and even then it will bolt first chance it gets. Or you can break a horse with patience. Firm rules, consistent treatment, fair handling. You will get a partner, an animal that works with you instead of against you, that remembers kindness even after the training is done. These prisoners are not horses. They are people. But the principle holds. You can break people with cruelty. You will get broken people, resentful, damaged, waiting for revenge, or you can treat them with firm fairness. Follow the rules that protect their dignity. You might get something different. You might get people who remember that Americans follow rules even when rules protect enemies. That memory matters. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday when these women go home and rebuild Germany, they will remember. American soldiers could have been monsters, chose not to be. That memory changes things. Bailey said your grandfather went back to work after that. Subject closed. But Bailey thought about it for 60 years, told the story to his grandkids, told historians, told anyone who would listen, because he saw the proof. 3 weeks after that conversation, Anna Schmidt recovered fully from her hypothermia. Should have hated the Americans for capturing her. Should have clung harder to Nazi ideology. Instead, she started asking Inga to teach her English. Started asking questions about American government, about democracy, about how rules worked when they were not attached to a dictator's whims. Elsa watched this, watched Anna transform from true believer to questioner, and Elsa felt her own certainty crumbling. If a 19-year-old could change her mind, what did that mean for everything else? Patricia pulled out a medical report. Lieutenant Chen's notes from late December. Patient Bergman shows signs of severe internal conflict. She performs work duties with excellence, follows all instructions, but exhibits anxiety symptoms, difficulty sleeping despite improved conditions, loss of appetite, hypervigilance. When asked if she is in pain, she replies that everything hurts but nothing is wrong. Psychological assessment indicates ideological crisis. Patient's belief system conflicts with observed reality. Recommend monitoring for self-harm risk. No intervention unless condition worsens. Time and consistency may resolve conflict naturally. Your grandfather read that report, signed off on it, added one note at the bottom. Continue current treatment protocol. No changes. She will find her way or she will not. Our job is to keep her safe while she decides. That was December 28th, 1 week before everything changed again. Jake shifted in his chair. This was a side of his grandfather he never knew existed. The careful observer, the patient handler, the man who understood that changing minds required time and consistency, not force. What happened next, he asked. Patricia smiled. It was a sad smile. A smile that knew how the story ended, but still hurt to tell it. Elsa's boots fell apart. Early January. Harsh weather continued. Her replacement boots from the medical tent were poor quality, worn thin before she ever got them. The soles separated. Water seeped in constantly. Her feet were wet all day, every day. Frostbite risk skyrocketed. She hid the problem. Pride again. Asking for new boots meant admitting need, admitting weakness. She limped through work details, tried to hide the pain. Your grandfather noticed within 2 days. Of course he did. January 8th, evening formation. Your grandfather approached Elsa directly, spoke through Inge as always, but his tone was firm, not angry, just final. Ma'am, need to inspect your boots, medical regulation. Elsa tried to refuse, said the boots were adequate. Your grandfather did not argue, just waited. 30 seconds of silence. Elsa broke first, removed her boots. Everyone saw the damage. Ruined leather, separated sole. Her feet inside were red and swollen. Early frostbite returning. Your grandfather examined the boots, made notes, handed them back, supply request filed, 3-day turnaround for replacements. Until then, stay off work detail, medical tent only, dry socks twice daily, report any numbness immediately. He walked away. Professional, distant, following protocol exactly. Elsa thought that was the end of it. Thought she would get standard issue replacements in 3 days. Thought nothing more would happen. She was wrong. The next morning, formation time, your grandfather appeared at the women's compound carrying a pair of boots. Not new issue, not from supply, his own boots. Men's size 9. Well-worn but beautifully maintained. Oiled leather, solid soles. The boots he kept as backup in case his primary pair failed. He walked to where Elsa stood in formation. Set the boots down in front of her, spoke through Ing, one sentence that changed everything. Temporary loan, supply truck delayed. Return when yours arrive. Then he turned and walked away. Before she could respond, before anyone could question, just left his boots there in the frozen dirt and returned to his duties wearing his only remaining pair. The women stared. Ing stared. Even the other guards stared. What the hell was Crawford doing? Those were his personal boots, his backup pair. If his primary boots failed now, he would have nothing. In January in the Texas Panhandle was no joke. Guards worked outside constantly. Frostbite affected Americans same as Germans. Elsa picked up the boots with shaking hands. They were still warm from his locker. She could smell leather oil and Texas dust. Inside the tongue, she found the stamp. Private J. Crawford, Lubbock, Texas, 1942. His boots from the beginning of the war, kept and maintained and saved for emergencies. Now on her feet, a German prisoner, an enemy, someone who 6 weeks ago believed Americans were monsters. She put them on. Too big. She stuffed newspaper in the toes, but they were warm, dry, solid. Her feet stopped hurting for the first time in weeks. That night she could not sleep, not from cold, from confusion, from the cognitive dissonance that was tearing her mind apart. Why would he do this? Rules did not require giving personal property. Geneva Convention said adequate boots, not personal boots, not backup boots, not boots with his name stamped inside. But there was something else, something that happened earlier that day, something that broke her completely. Patricia pulled out another testimony, this one from Elsa herself. from the 1973 interview. That afternoon, before he gave me the boots I was cleaning the medical tent, Sergeant Crawford came for his routine inspection. He took off his jacket, hung it on a hook, then went to check the supply inventory with Lieutenant Chen. I was alone with his jacket for perhaps 3 minutes. His wallet fell from the pocket. I should have left it, should have called him, but I picked it up. My hands were shaking. I do not know why I opened it. Curiosity, perhaps, or the desire to understand this man who was shattering everything I believed. Inside was a photograph, a young girl, maybe 7 years old, blonde hair and braids, gap-toothed smile, so much joy in her face. On the back, written in fading pencil, Margaret, may God keep you warm, 1918. I stared at that photograph and I saw my own sister, Greta, dead in Dresden from the bombing I did not yet know about. But the resemblance was there. The same age, the same innocence, the same trust that the world would keep them safe. And I understood. This American sergeant had lost a sister to cold, just as I would lose mine to fire. He carried her photograph everywhere, a reminder of what cold could take. And when he saw us freezing, when he saw Anna collapse, when he saw me destroying my feet out of stubborn pride, he saw his sister Margaret. That is why he could not let us freeze. Not because we were human beings deserving dignity, though we were, but because we were sisters, daughters, children someone loved. And if he could not save Margaret in 1918, he could save us in 1944. I put the wallet back, hands shaking. When he returned, he picked up his jacket, looked at me. I think he knew. The wallet had been moved slightly, but he said nothing, just nodded once and left. That night, when he gave me his boots, I understood it was not kindness. It was grief transformed into action. It was a man who lost his sister to cold, making sure no other sister froze on his watch, even if that sister was his enemy. Patricia closed the folder, looked at Jake with wet eyes. That was the moment Elsa Bergman's Nazi ideology shattered completely. Not because of arguments, not because of lectures, because she saw a photograph of a dead child and understood that the enemy was human, that the enemy grieved, that the enemy's losses were as real as her own. And the boots he gave her that night became more than footwear. They became proof. Proof that enemies have families, that suffering transcends nationality, that a Texas rancher and a German nurse could both understand the pain of losing a sister even though they stood on opposite sides of a war. Jake sat in silence. His grandfather never mentioned Margaret, never talked about that loss, never explained why he did any of this, just carried a photograph and a grief and a determination that nobody else's sister would freeze if he could prevent it. Inga found her sitting outside the tent at midnight. Patricia continued, staring at the boots in the moonlight, crying silently. What is wrong, Inga asked. Everything, Elsa whispered. Everything I was taught is wrong. If Americans are monsters, why does this sergeant keep saving us? Why does he give his own boots to an enemy? Why does he follow rules that protect people who wanted to kill him? Why is he kinder than anyone in the Wehrmacht ever was to prisoners? Why does the enemy act more human than my own leaders? He lost a sister to cold. I will lose mine to fire. We are the same. And if we are the same, then everything else is a lie. Inga sat next to her, put an arm around her shoulders. Let her cry. Maybe, Inga said quietly, maybe you were taught wrong. Maybe the enemy is not who they said. Maybe the enemy is who taught you to hate. Elsa cried harder, because she knew Inga was right. And knowing that meant everything she had believed, everything she had fought for, everything she had suffered for was a lie. The ideology that shaped her entire adult life was propaganda. And this Texas rancher, with his patient eyes and his strict rules and his backup boots and his grief for a sister dead 26 years, had proven it without saying a word. That was the night Elsa Bergman stopped being a Nazi. That was the night she started becoming something else. Something your grandfather never got to see completed. But something he started. With straw and pallets and blankets and a photograph and finally with boots. Patricia set down the last folder. The office was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. Jake sat motionless. His grandfather's life suddenly larger and stranger and more meaningful than he ever imagined. There is more, Patricia said. The story does not end there. But that is enough for today. You need time to process. And I need to show you something. She stood, led Jake out of the office. down a hallway lined with photographs of old soldiers, into a large room under construction, plastic sheeting covered walls. Paint cans sat in corners, but in the center of the room stood a glass case. And inside the glass case sat a pair of boots, women's boots, German military issue, small, worn, carefully preserved. Elsa's boots, Patricia said. The ones she wore that first night when she refused your grandfather's help. The ones she wore when her feet froze. Her granddaughter donated them along with the letters. They arrived 24 years ago in 2000, same year your grandfather died. We always thought that was significant, like she was waiting to send them until he was gone, respecting his silence even across the ocean. Jake stared at the boots. They looked so small, so inadequate, imagining someone standing all night in those in 10-degree cold out of pure stubborn ideology. Next to them, Patricia continued, we are going to display your grandfather's boots, the ones he gave her, the ones she kept for 53 years, the ones that taught her everything she needed to know about what America really means. Together, these two pairs of boots tell the whole story. Enemy and American, suffering and mercy, rules and kindness. Same thing when done right. She turned to Jake. Will you let us borrow them for the exhibit? Your grandfather's boots belong here, where people can see them, where the story can continue teaching what he taught. That rules matter, that people matter, that enemies are not born, they are made. And sometimes with patience and consistency and strict fairness, they can be unmade. Jake looked at the empty space next to Elsa's boots, imagined his grandfather's boots there, imagined visitors reading the story, learning the lesson, carrying it forward. Yes, he said, yes, that is what Grandpa Jim would want, not for glory, just to keep teaching, keep following the rules that matter. Patricia smiled, squeezed his shoulder. Then let me tell you the rest. Let me tell you what happened after Elsa left Camp Clarkson. Let me tell you about the note your grandfather carried into battle, about the death that was not really a death, about 50 years of silence and teaching and boots polished every week in memory of a man who gave more than leather and thread. He gave proof that civilization survives even in war. But that story, Patricia said, will have to wait until tomorrow. Jake nodded. He was exhausted, emotionally wrung out. He needed air, needed space, needed to drive out to the ranch and stand in the same fields his grandfather walked and try to understand how one man's quiet decency rippled across 80 years and an ocean and 10,000 lives. He left the museum carrying the wooden box. The boots inside felt heavier than before, heavy with meaning, heavy with legacy, heavy with the weight of a story that was not finished being told. As he drove through Amarillo toward the ranch, Jake thought about rules and kindness, about cowboys and prisoners, about boots and dignity, and what it means to be civilized when everything pushes you toward cruelty. His grandfather had known, had lived it, had never needed to talk about it because he lived it every single day. On the ranch, in the war, after the war, until the day he died in 2000. Rules matter because people matter. Jake was beginning to understand what that really meant, and tomorrow he would learn the rest. Jake returned to the museum the next morning. Patricia was waiting with coffee and two thick folders he had not seen before. One was labeled Crawford James M., and the other Bergman Elsa. Between them lay 80 years of a story that nobody knew existed. Patricia poured coffee and opened the Crawford folder first. Your grandfather stayed at Camp Clarkson exactly 4 more days after Elsa left. January 16th, his deployment orders came through. Belgium, Battle of the Bulge. The German counteroffensive had caught American forces off guard in December. Massive casualties, chaos. The army needed every available man. Military police were being rushed to the front to handle the flood of prisoners. Tens of thousands of German soldiers captured in the fighting. Someone had to process them, guard them, keep order in the middle of a battle that was tearing Belgium apart in the coldest winter Europe had seen in 50 years. Your grandfather had 72 hours to settle his affairs. He went home to the ranch, spent 2 days with your grandmother, Mary. She was 7 months pregnant, their first child. Your grandfather's father was still alive then, 80 years old and still working cattle. The two men rode the fence line together one last time, checked every post, every wire, made sure everything was secure. Nobody recorded what they said to each other, but your grandmother told the story years later. Said when the men came back to the house, your great-grandfather hugged your grandfather for a long time, longer than was normal for men of that generation. Then said one sentence, "You do right by those boys over there, same as you did right by those prisoners here. The Crawford name means something. You carry it proper." Your grandfather nodded, did not trust himself to speak, just nodded. The night before he left, your grandfather sat at the kitchen table with Mary. She watched him pack his field gear, watched him clean his rifle, watched him fold his spare uniform with the careful precision he applied to everything. Then she saw him pull out a small, folded piece of paper, the note from Elsa. He looked at it for a long time. Mary asked what it was. Your grandfather hesitated, then told her about the German medical assistant, about the boots, about the woman who stood all night rather than accept help, about how stubbornness reminded him of Margaret, about the note written in German that he could not read but somehow understood anyway. Mary said, "Translate it, find out what she wrote." Your grandfather shook his head, said he did not need translation, said he saw it in Elsa's eyes the day she left, saw understanding, saw transformation. The words did not matter, the change did. But Mary insisted, said if something happened to him, if he did not come back, that German woman should know he got her message, should know it mattered. Your grandfather agreed, called his commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, asked him to translate the note and send it back to Elsa if anything went wrong. Rodriguez promised, took the note, had it translated by a German-speaking clerk at headquarters. The translation came back that night. "Thank you, I was wrong about enemies." Rodriguez showed it to your grandfather, asked if he wanted to write a response. Your grandfather thought for a long moment, then borrowed a pencil and wrote on the bottom of Elsa's note, just one sentence, "Ma'am, rules matter because people matter. Don't forget that." Signed it JC, folded it, gave it back to Rodriguez with instructions. "If I do not make it, send this to the German prisoner, Elsa Bergman, at Fort Clark. Tell her I carried it. Tell her the words mattered." Rodriguez tucked the note in his own gear, said nothing more. What was there to say? War made men think about legacy, about what they left behind, about whether their lives meant something beyond just existing. Your grandfather deployed January 21st, arrived Belgium January 22nd, was assigned to a POW processing station near Bastogne. The fighting was still heavy, artillery every night, air raids, confusion, thousands of captured Germans flooding in, wounded, frozen, defeated. Your grandfather applied the same rules he used at Camp Clarkson, processed prisoners efficiently, ensured medical treatment, distributed blankets and rations, set up shelter. One of the junior officers asked why he cared so much about enemy comfort when American soldiers were dying 50 yards away. Your grandfather's answer was recorded in the officer's diary. That diary is in the National Archives now. Patricia had a copy. She read it aloud. Lieutenant Morrison wrote, "Sergeant Crawford said to me, 'These men are prisoners now, not soldiers, not threats, just cold, scared boys who want to go home. Same as us. I can hate what they did, but I will not hate them while they are in my care.' That is the rule. That is what separates us from them. We follow rules even when it costs us, especially then." I asked him if he really believed that, if he thought rules mattered more than revenge, more than justice for the men we lost. He looked at me with the coldest eyes I ever saw, said this, "Son, I knew a German woman who believed her side would win because they were ruthless, because they did not care about rules or mercy or human dignity. She learned different, learned it from Americans who followed rules she did not think mattered. That lesson changed her whole life. Maybe someday these German boys will learn the same. Maybe they will go home and remember. Americans could have been monsters, chose to follow rules instead. That memory might prevent the next war, might save more lives than killing them ever could." Morrison wrote that he never forgot that conversation, never forgot Crawford's conviction that rules applied to everyone or they applied to no one. That civilization was not something you turned on and off based on convenience. It was a choice you made every day, every hour, every interaction. Your grandfather worked the POW processing station for exactly one day. January 23rd, at 1700 hours, German artillery hit the supply depot 200 yards from the prison compound. Shrapnel tore through the area, killed 6 men, wounded 30. Your grandfather was hit. Shrapnel to the chest and left leg. Severe bleeding. He was evacuated to a field hospital. Stabilized. Shipped to a larger hospital in France. Then England. The wound to his chest was bad, but not fatal. Collapsed lung, broken ribs. The leg was worse, shattered femur, multiple surgeries. He was unconscious for 3 days, delirious for another week. By the time he was coherent enough to communicate, the initial casualty reports had already gone out. Battle of the Bulge casualties were staggering. Thousands dead, thousands missing. Paperwork was chaos. Someone made an error. Listed Sergeant James Crawford as killed in action instead of wounded in action. The correction did not catch up for months. By then, your grandfather was in a recovery hospital in England, then shipped stateside in March. Discharged April 1945 with a Purple Heart in a medical retirement. He came home to the ranch, to marry, to a son born while he was overseas. Your Uncle Robert, born February 10th. Your grandfather met his son for the first time in April. 3 months old, did not know his father. Your grandfather never corrected the killed in action report, never filed the paperwork, never contacted the army to fix the error. He just went home, started ranching, started being a father, started being alive in a quiet way that did not require explaining or documenting or proving. Patricia looked up from the file. Why, Jake asked. Why would he let everyone think he died? Patricia pulled out another document, a letter dated June 1945, from Captain Rodriguez to Elsa Bergman at Fort Clark. Rodriguez kept his promise, sent Elsa the note, but he did not know Crawford survived. Nobody knew. So Rodriguez's letter told Elsa that Crawford died at the Bulge, that he carried her note into battle, that he wanted her to know her words mattered. Elsa believed it, believed Crawford died in the cold and chaos of Belgium, believed she would never get to thank him properly. That grief shaped everything she did for the next 53 years until her own death in 1998. Your grandfather could have corrected it, could have written to Elsa, could have said, "Surprise, I am alive." But he did not. And I think I know why. Patricia showed Jake another letter. This one from 1947. Elsa Bergman to the U.S. Army Personnel Office, requesting information about Sergeant James Crawford, trying to confirm his death, trying to find his family, trying to thank them for his sacrifice. The Army confirmed the original report. Killed in action, buried in a military cemetery in Belgium, which was not true. But the paperwork said so, and Elsa believed it. She wrote about it, Patricia continued, in her teaching notes, in her lectures, in interviews. She talked about the American sergeant who gave her boots and then died in the same cold he saved her from. That story became the foundation of everything she taught. The martyr who followed rules even unto death. The man who proved civilization matters more than survival. If your grandfather had appeared in 1947 and said, "Actually, I am alive," it would have undermined her entire narrative, would have turned a martyr story into just a nice guy who did a good thing and went home. Still good, but not transcendent, not the kind of story that changes 10,000 lives. So he stayed silent. Let her believe the powerful story. Let her teach the lesson without the complication of his survival, sacrificed his own recognition so her students would have a more compelling example. That is the most James Crawford thing I ever heard, Jake said quietly. Giving up glory so someone else could teach better. Following rules even when the rule was staying dead. Patricia smiled sadly. That is exactly what he did. And it worked. Elsa Bergman built a 53-year career on the foundation of his example. Let me show you what she accomplished. She opened the Bergman folder. Inside were photographs, letters, newspaper clippings in German with English translations attached. The chronicle of a life transformed. Elsa arrived at Fort Clark in January 1945. Better conditions, heated barracks, medical facilities, real winter clothing. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt empty. She missed Crawford's silent presence, missed the way rules at Camp Clarkson meant something beyond just procedure. They meant care. They meant dignity. She tried to replicate it, started teaching other prisoners about the Geneva Convention, about how American rules protected even enemies, about what that meant for rebuilding Germany after the war. The younger prisoners listened. Some believed, others mocked. But Elsa persisted. Then in February, she received Rodriguez's letter. Crawford was dead, had carried her note, had written back. Rules matter because people matter. She read it alone in the barracks. Read it 10 times, 20. Memorized every word. Then she broke down completely. Sobbed for hours, not just grief, guilt. Because after leaving Camp Clarkson, she had started doubting again. Started falling back into old patterns. Started questioning whether Crawford's kindness was real or just an anomaly. His death proved it was real. Proved he meant every word. Proved rules mattered to him more than life itself. He died following those rules, protecting prisoners, being civilized in the middle of hell. That realization forged her, turned grief into purpose. If Crawford died teaching her that people matter, then she had to live teaching others, had to make his death mean something. She started immediately, organized classes in the camp, English lessons, civics lessons, medical ethics lessons. She used herself as the primary example. I believe propaganda. It nearly destroyed me. An American sergeant saved me by following rules I thought were weakness. Those rules were strength. That strength defeated our ideology more thoroughly than any bomb. The camp administrators noticed, encouraged her. After the war ended, they offered her a choice: return to Germany immediately or stay in America for additional education. She chose education. Studied nursing at a program for displaced persons. Graduated 1947, top of her class. Then she returned to Germany. Dresden was rubble. Her family was gone. Mother and sister killed in the firebombing. Father died of illness shortly after. She was alone, but she had purpose. She started working at a makeshift hospital, applied everything she learned: strict protocols, patient dignity, rules that protected everyone regardless of nationality or background. The other German staff noticed, asked where she learned this approach. She told them about Camp Clarkson, about the sergeant, about the boots. Word spread. By 1950, she was teaching at a nursing school. By 1955, she was department head. By 1960, she was dean. Every class started the same way. She would set a pair of boots on her desk, American military boots, men's size 9, well-worn, carefully polished. These boots saved my life, she would say. Not because they kept my feet warm, because they taught me that enemies are made, not born. That rules protect humanity. That civilization is a choice we make every day. The man who gave me these boots died believing I understood that lesson. I will spend the rest of my life proving he was right. Patricia showed Jake photographs of Elsa teaching. Older now, gray hair, but the same serious face, the same intensity, and in every photograph prominently displayed a pair of men's size 9 American military boots. She never married, never had children, devoted her entire life to teaching. Over the decades, an estimated 10,000 nurses graduated under her instruction. They spread across Germany, across Europe, carried her lessons with them: patient rights, medical ethics, the dignity of human life regardless of circumstances. Patricia pulled out testimonies, letters from Elsa's former students, interviews conducted in the 1980s and 1990s. Jake read them slowly. One student, now a hospital administrator in Munich, wrote, "Dr. Bergman changed how I understood nursing. She taught us that following medical protocols was not bureaucracy. It was respect. Every rule existed to protect patient dignity. When I wanted to skip hand washing between patients because I was busy, I thought of her boots, of the American sergeant who followed rules even for enemies. I washed my hands. 40 years later, I still wash my hands thinking of those boots." Another, a nursing school director in Hamburg, wrote, "Dr. Bergman showed us the boots at the start of every semester, told us the story, then asked if an American soldier could treat Nazi prisoners with dignity when he had every reason to hate them. Can you treat your patients with dignity when they are rude or difficult or unpleasant?" The answer was always yes, because if rules mattered in war, they mattered in peace. That lesson shaped my entire career. A third, a hospice nurse, wrote, "I cared for Dr. Bergman in her final days. She was dying of cancer, in pain, but she insisted on following protocols, took her medication on schedule, followed the care plan. When I asked why she cared so much about rules when she was dying, She smiled and said, "A Texas cowboy taught me that how you follow rules when it is hard says more about you than when it is easy. I will die following the rules that protect dignity, just like he did." Jake wiped his eyes. His grandfather had changed one woman. That woman changed 10,000 nurses. Those nurses changed hundreds of thousands of patients. Ripples spreading across 80 years. In 1973, Patricia continued. An American historian doing POW camp research found her, interviewed her, asked about her teaching philosophy. She told the whole story, about Crawford, about the cold, about the boots, about the note, about his death, about spending 30 years trying to honor his memory. The interview was recorded, became part of an oral history archive. That is where the story should have ended. One old woman remembering one good man, a footnote in history. But Elsa was not done. In her will written 1997, she left specific instructions. The boots were to be returned to the Crawford family in Lubbock, Texas. She had tried for decades to find them. Written letters, made inquiries, always hit dead ends because your grandfather was listed as dead and his family never knew about any German prisoners. When Elsa died in 1998, her granddaughter followed the instructions, spent 2 years researching, finally found the right Crawford family, contacted them. Your Uncle Robert received the letter in 1999. He was 54 years old, had no idea his father served at a POW camp, had no idea about any German woman, had no idea about boots. Robert called your grandfather. Your grandfather was 91. Sharp mind but failing body. He listened to Robert explain about the letter from Germany, about Elsa Bergman, about boots being returned. Robert said your grandfather was quiet for a long time, then said this, "Tell them to keep the boots. I gave them away. They belong to her memory now. I do not need them back." Robert tried to argue, said the boots were part of his legacy, part of family history. Your grandfather cut him off. "Son, my legacy is not in boots. It is in what those boots taught. If that German woman used them to teach 10,000 nurses how to be decent, then they did more good in her hands than they ever did on my feet. Let them stay where they matter." So the boots stayed in Germany, until Elsa's granddaughter decided they belonged in a museum, donated them to us in 2000, the same year your grandfather died, along with all the letters, all the teaching materials, all the proof that one Texas rancher changed medical education in an entire country without ever knowing it happened. Patricia closed the folder, looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. Your grandfather died in 2000, 1 year after learning Elsa had honored him for 50 years. Elsa died in 1998, 2 years before Crawford passed. Both carried this story to their graves. Both believed the other never knew the full impact. But now we know. And now we can tell it. Jake sat in silence, processing. His grandfather had known all along that Elsa lived and taught and honored him. Had known since 2001, when Robert called. Had known for his final year of life. And still chose silence. Still chose to let her memory of a dead martyr remain intact even though he was alive. That was love, not romantic love. Something deeper. Love of principle. Love of the lesson itself more than credit for teaching it. "Can I see the rest of the exhibit?" Jake asked. Patricia led him back to the construction area. More work had been done since yesterday. The walls were painted now. Deep blue, stars stenciled in gold. The display case with Elsa's boots had been joined by other cases. Photographs, documents, timelines, and in the center waiting for completion, an empty case with a placard already in place. The boots that taught an enemy to pray. Sergeant James Crawford, Camp Clarkson, Texas, January 1945. Below that, a longer description. Jake read it slowly. These boots represent more than survival gear. They represent the choice to remain civilized when everything pushes toward cruelty. In January 1945, Sergeant James Crawford gave his backup boots to a German prisoner who needed them more than he did. That act of simple decency shattered her Nazi ideology more completely than any propaganda. She spent 53 years teaching medical ethics based on what those boots taught her. Rules protect humanity. Dignity matters. Enemies are made, not born. 10,000 nurses learned those lessons. Countless patients benefited. All because one Texas rancher believed that how you treat people in your care defines who you are. These boots walked through war and emerged teaching peace. They belong here so future generations can learn what Sergeant Crawford and Dr. Bergman proved together. Civilization is not automatic. It is chosen. Every day, every interaction, every pair of boots. Jake felt his throat tighten. This was his grandfather, not just the quiet man who fixed fences and taught him to ride, but the same man, the same principles applied to cattle and prisoners and grandchildren alike. You take care of what is in your care. You follow rules because rules protect dignity. You do right even when nobody is watching, especially when nobody is watching. When does the exhibit open, Jake asked. June 6th, D-Day anniversary. We are inviting veterans from all over Texas, families of POW camp guards, German cultural organizations, medical schools, nursing programs. We want this to be educational. Want people to understand what the greatest generation really means. Not just winning the war, winning it the right way, with rules intact, with dignity preserved, with humanity protected even in the midst of violence. Jake nodded. I want to speak. At the opening, I want to tell people who my grandfather really was. Patricia smiled. We were hoping you would say that. We need the family voice. Need someone who knew him as a man, not just a historical figure. Will you do it? Jake looked at the empty case. Imagine his grandfather's boots there. Imagine visitors stopping, reading, learning, carrying the lesson forward. Yes, yes, I will do it. Because Grandpa Jim would want the lesson taught, not the man celebrated, the lesson. Patricia squeezed his hand. Then let me help you prepare. We have 3 months. Let us make this opening something your grandfather and Dr. Bergman would both be proud of. Over the next 12 weeks, Jake worked with Patricia to build the exhibit. He donated the boots, provided family photographs, shared stories, wrote his speech, rehearsed it 100 times. And on June 6, 2024, 80 years after D-Day, the exhibit opened. The museum was packed, veterans in their 90s wearing old uniforms that no longer fit quite right, their children and grandchildren, German cultural representatives, nursing students, historians, press. Patricia gave the opening remarks, explained the history, introduced Jake. He walked to the podium, looked out at the crowd, took a breath. My grandfather, James Crawford, never told war stories, he began. Not once in the 92 years he lived. I asked him about the war when I was 12. He said some things don't need telling. Some things you just carry. For 80 years, he carried boots in a letter in a secret. He died in 2000 never speaking about Camp Clarkson, never mentioning Elsa Bergman, never explaining why he kept a German woman's photograph in his effects. I found the boots 3 months ago, in his attic, in a box marked Camp Clarkson, Personal Effects, 1944. And I learned that my grandfather did something extraordinary by being ordinary. He followed rules when it was easier not to. He showed mercy when revenge was expected. He gave his boots to an enemy who needed them more. And because of that simple act, 10,000 nurses learned medical ethics from a woman who learned them from a cowboy she met for 6 weeks in a frozen Texas camp. Jake paused, looked at the boots behind glass, his grandfather's boots and Elsa's boots side by side. That is not a war story, he continued. That is a story about who we are when nobody is watching. That is American exceptionalism, not through power, through principle. My grandfather could have been famous, could have had medals and recognition and documentary films. Instead, he chose silence, chose to let a German woman build her career on the story of his death, even though he was alive, because he understood something most of us forget. The message matters more than the messenger. Dr. Bergman taught for 53 years. Her students became department heads, hospital administrators, nursing school directors. They taught the next generation. Who taught the next? All carrying forward one lesson. Rules protect humanity. Dignity matters. Civilization is a choice. That choice started with my grandfather, a Texas rancher who lost his sister to cold in 1918, who joined the Army in 1942, who was assigned to guard German prisoners in 1944, who could have hated them, could have been cruel, could have followed the minimum regulations and nothing more. Instead, he brought straw and pallets and blankets. He ensured medical care. He gave his own boots to a woman who stood all night rather than accept enemy help. Not because as he was exceptional, because he believed in rules, believed they applied to everyone, believed civilization survived through consistent decency even when decency was hard. He was wounded at the Battle of the Bulge, listed as killed in action, never corrected the error, came home, raised cattle, raised a family, never sought glory, never expected recognition, just lived his principles every day until he died. And 79 years later, those boots are still teaching, still transforming, still proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not violence. It is integrity. It is following rules when rules protect human life. It is treating enemies like people, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve to remain civilized. Jake's voice broke. He paused, steadied himself. My grandfather gave away boots because he could not save his sister Margaret in 1918. But by following regulations designed to protect human dignity, he saved someone else's sister, Elsa Bergman, and she became a teacher, and her students became healers. And the ripple continues. These boots in this museum are not artifacts. They are proof. Proof that sometimes the most powerful act is refusing to become the monster your enemy expects. Proof that civilization survives through choice. Proof that one Texas cowboy and one German prisoner, enemies by war, became partners in teaching by following rules that matter. My grandfather would hate this attention, would say he just did his job. But his job was being human in inhuman times. His job was staying civilized when civilization was under attack. His job was following rules that protected dignity, even when protecting dignity meant helping enemies. That is the America worth preserving. Not perfect, but principled. Not sinless, but trying, not easy, but right. Rules matter because people matter. My grandfather wrote that 80 years ago. Dr. Bergman taught it for 50 years. Those 10,000 nurses lived it in their care. And now if we remember this lesson, if we carry it forward, if we choose civilization every day, the way my grandfather did, then these boots will keep teaching long after all of us are gone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering. Thank you to everyone who follows rules even when it is hard. You are carrying on my grandfather's tradition. You are proving that America still matters, not because we are powerful, because we are principled. And principles, when lived faithfully, change the world one pair of boots at a time. Jake stepped back from the podium. The room was silent for 3 heartbeats, then applause, thunderous. People standing, veterans saluting, nurses wiping eyes. Patricia stood next to him. Together they watched as visitors filed past the exhibit, stopped at the boots, read the placards, stared at the photographs. An old man, 94, leaned on his grandson's arm, studied the boots for a long time, then turned to the young man. I served at a camp like that. Never thought about it this way. We just did our jobs, followed regulations, thought we were just processing prisoners. The grandson looked at his grandfather with new eyes. You were doing more than that, Grandpa. You were protecting civilization. The old man's eyes were wet. Maybe we were. A nursing student stood before Elsa's teaching photograph. Read the testimony from her students, pulled out her phone, took a picture of the placard with the rules quote, texted it to someone, smiled. A German cultural representative shook Jake's hand, said in accented English, Dr. Bergman's legacy is known in Germany, but we did not know the American side. Thank you for completing the story. Thank you for showing us that enemies can become teachers. We need that lesson now more than ever. Hours passed. The crowd thinned. Finally, only Jake and Patricia remained in the exhibit hall. They stood together looking at the boots behind glass. He did it, Patricia said quietly. Your grandfather. He changed the world. Not with speeches or battles, with boots and rules and relentless decency. Jake nodded, and he never needed anyone to know. That is what makes it matter. He was the same man at home, with cattle, with family, with everyone. Consistent, fair, decent. Following rules because rules protect dignity. They walked outside. Evening light painted the Texas sky orange and gold. Somewhere out there, empty land still remembered Camp Clarkson. Still remembered the frozen nights in canvas tents and 87 women learning that propaganda was a lie. Still remembered the sergeant who taught without words, who gave without expecting, who followed rules without wavering, who died without knowing he had built a cathedral of decency from nothing but straw and pallets and boots and principle. But that cathedral still stood, still taught, still changed lives. And now, after 80 years of silence, the story was finally told. The lesson finally public. The boots finally teaching everyone what they taught one German woman in 1945. That civilization is not a given. It is a choice made every day by ordinary people who decide that rules matter, that people matter, that enemies can become teachers if you treat them with stubborn consistency and fair dealing. James Crawford made that choice. Elsa Bergman learned from it. 10,000 nurses taught it. And now in a museum in Texas, 2 pairs of boots prove it to everyone who walks through the door. Rules matter because people matter. Enemies are made, not born. Civilization survives through choice. And sometimes a pair of boots from a Texas cowboy can change the world. The lesson is immortal. The boots are eternal. The truth keeps teaching. That is the legacy. That is the story. That is the America worth preserving. 1 pair of boots, 1 frozen night, 1 man who believed following rules when it was hard mattered more than glory when it was easy. 80 years later, those boots are still walking, still teaching, still transforming, and they always will be.